Okay, today we're going to talk about the basics of email as a brief refresher to make sure everybody's on the same page. All right, to begin, we'll go over an agenda, what we're going to cover in this lecture. First, why do we need to talk about email at all? And what are the basics of an email? The first steps, looking at salutations and closings, and what to put in the subject line of an email. Okay, so why do we need to talk about email? I'm sure that you thought, I already know how to do email. I do it all the time. Well, there are several reasons that it's important to discuss how to write an email well. First of all, it's the basics of writing, thinking about the purpose for your writing, the audience for your writing, who's going to read it, and following format guidelines. All of these are very basic writing skills that everyone needs to know as a writer in English. And all of these are easy to address in email because they're very specific. You have a specific purpose, you have a specific audience, and you have a very detailed and structured format. Email is also the main conduit of communication in academia and the professional world. So whether you are a graduate student or you're working, this is the main way that you're going to be communicating with your colleagues, with your superiors. And so it's extremely important that you do it well. In addition, it's usually the first personal interaction that you have with a particular contact, especially if it's a professor or if you're new at a job, interacting with colleagues. And now it isn't specifically personal in that it's not face-to-face, but it is personal in that it's for a particular person. Email is also a high-stakes interaction. That means that this can make a really good first impression on the person that you're sending the email to, or it can make a terrible impression. It can frustrate people. It can even offend or make people angry because there is no way to convey feeling. There's no facial expressions to read. So you have to be very careful how you deliver the information. Okay, so we're going to discuss the basics of an email and look at the first steps. First of all, who are your recipients and what method of delivery are you going to choose? Are you going to choose to a particular person? Are you going to carbon copy somebody? Or are you going to blind carbon copy? Carbon copy and blind carbon copy are specifically used mostly in business, but they are also used in academia, in that you're sending a copy of an email to someone who is not the main intended recipient. So you're sending it to another person. Now, you probably already know that a carbon copy, CC, means you send a copy of your email to an additional person, and everyone on the recipient list can see that you have done so. When you send a blind carbon copy, that means that the main recipient cannot see that you send this email to someone else as well. It's important to choose the correct method. You need to remember how the person that's receiving your email will feel about the information that you're sending. So it can be very important if you're sending information to a supervisor and you're wanting to carbon copy this email to someone that is not connected to this information, they're probably not going to be very happy about it. In addition, if you're trying to send out an email to a lot of different people that may or may not know each other, it makes sense to use blind carbon copy because you don't want them to try and reply to everyone on the list because this can lead to annoyance. I'm sure that you've read about issues where a person in a corporation or even in a university system replied all to everyone in a carbon copy email, and this leads to a lot of frustration. Okay, let's take a look at some salutations and closings. A salutation or a greeting is the first line of the body of your email in the text box. So basically the first thing you say. It would be the equivalent to hi or hello. Some example salutations could be, if you were writing to a friend named Tom, Dear Tom, good morning, good afternoon, Tom, hi, Tom, or hey. The recipient's name is almost always part of the salutation, except in very informal situations, especially if you are on a long email thread. So you've been replying and replying and replying to a person over and over again. You're probably not going to include a salutation in those cases. But for a first email, even if you've emailed this person before, you need to have some kind of a greeting or salutation at the beginning. When you write someone's name in a salutation, you need to think about whether or not the situation is formal or informal. Formal salutations typically include a title with the person's name. Some titles could be Dr., Mr., Ms., Mrs., and Miss. Miss is much less used, especially in written communication. It's more verbal in choice. But you'll probably use Mr., Mrs., or Ms., and Doctor quite frequently. Please be careful when choosing between Ms. and Mrs. Only use Mrs. when you are certain that the woman you are addressing your email to is both married and wishes to be addressed as a married woman. Ms. is a safe choice because this is something that is appropriate for a woman, whether she is married or unmarried, and whether or not she's a professional. So Ms. is a safe choice. Mrs. is a little problematic, especially if you don't know the person well. Okay, so the question should be, when you put in a salutation, especially if it's going to be formal, we would have title plus first name plus last name, or title plus last name. You're never going to have a title plus a first name only. This is not used, not in written English. Let's look at the chart and look at the different levels of formality. So, for example, if someone was going to contact me the first time or be extremely formal, they would address me as Ms. Anissa Dahl, probably because they don't know whether or not I'm married. For a man who has a doctorate or has a medical, is in the medical profession, we could address him as Dr. Eric Dahl. In addition, if we're still being formal but we're having ongoing contact, we don't have to use the first name every time. We could just continue with Ms. Dahl, Dr. Dahl. In an informal situation, it's perfectly acceptable to use just the first name. So if you have ongoing contact with a person, if you work with someone on a regular basis, then it's perfectly acceptable in American culture to use someone's first name. If you're addressing someone and you are not sure if they have a title or if they are a man or a woman, it's best just to use their full name, especially the first time that you contact them. So Anissa Dahl, Eric Dahl. As I mentioned before, do not use titles with first names only. Do not reverse the family and first name with a comma. This would be for alphabetization purposes only. And try not to use titles when you're trying to be informal. It is never okay to only call someone by their last name. When you close an email, when you end an email, you will have some kind of a closing statement followed by a comma, and then hit return and put your name. So sincerely is a very common closing. So sincerely, comma, Anissa Dahl. Formal closings include sincerely, best regards, kind regards, thank you. Informal would be thanks, see you soon, best, take care, etc. Some closings that you may have seen before are not ones that you should be using. Inappropriate closings might be like God bless, later, or TTYL, which stands for talk to you later. God bless is inappropriate in that it is religious, and unless you are in a strictly religious situation, like you're communicating with someone at your church or mosque, that might be one situation where you could use this, but in a work or school situation, this is not appropriate. Later would be very informal and is not something that you should be using, especially with a colleague. TTYL, in addition, is very, very informal and is not appropriate choice. BR and YRS might be common abbreviations that you are familiar with, but they are not correct American English, and an American recipient would not understand what you meant. Okay, we're going to move on to what subject lines we should be choosing in an email. So first of all, every email needs a subject line. Most of the time, an email program is going to prompt you to include a subject line if you forget to type one. Most emails need to have a subject line because this gives an indication of what the email is about. A good subject line is brief, clear, and appropriate, and it answers the questions, what do you want, and what key words best express your purpose. So what is it that you want from the person that you are emailing? Okay, some examples of good subject lines are here on the left-hand side of the chart. Request for SA1 extension. So this makes it very clear that the sender is asking for something. The topic, the SA1, and also an extension, what it is that they're expecting to get. Project meeting notes, etc. These are very good because they give a clear idea of what the sender wants. Poor subject lines are vague, like hello. This is not necessary. You're going to say hello in the salutation at the beginning of the email, not in the subject line. NISA is a poor subject line because you don't need to put your name in the subject line because the name of the person who is sending the email is part of the email. Also, things to remember. People often check email on their phones, and so subject lines need to be particularly short. So make sure that your words count and they don't get cut off. If you put a subject line or indeed any part of an email in all capital letters, this is the same as shouting at someone. Please don't do this. Make certain there are no spelling or grammatical mistakes in your subject line because this is the very first thing that a person is going to see, and it really makes a terrible first impression if you've made mistakes in your subject line. Okay, to sum up what we've talked about today, make sure you decide how your email should be delivered, the delivery method. Choose the proper salutation, title, and name for your salutation for the person who's receiving it. Choose a closing that matches the formality of that salutation, and make sure your subject line is brief, clear, and appropriate. Your next step will be to watch the lecture on email requests.